For 23 years, the two greatest powers of the Western Mediterranean were locked into a struggle over the control of Sicily. Finally, in 241 BC, after a major naval defeat, the Carthaginians had to sue for peace. The Romans imposed a harsh peace treaty on them, stipulating that Carthage would leave Sicily and pay a hefty sum to the victors. Following the conclusion of the First Punic War, the Carthaginians found themselves in a precarious situation. Having to pay an indemnity to Rome, the Carthaginians were short on money, and they tried to avoid paying their mercenaries. This backfired spectacularly, and their Sicilian veterans, numbering over 20,000, erupted into a revolt. Heavily taxed Libyan communities seized this opportunity and joined the rebellion. The brutality from both sides during the war earned it the moniker Truceless War. On several occasions, the Carthaginians came close to complete collapse, but in the end they prevailed, in large part thanks to the brilliance of one general, Hamilcar Barca. As the war raged on, Hamilcar was gaining favor in the Carthaginian Senate. By the time he brought this war to a close in 238 BC, a significant pro-Barcid faction formed in the Senate, and Hamilcar became the de facto ruler of the city. With the rebellion quelled, Hamilcar could now turn to his ultimate goal, the conquest of Spain. But before this campaign could commence, Hamilcar had to deal with Sardinia. During the Truceless War, the mercenaries on Sardinia rebelled and took control of the island. They appealed to Rome for help, but they were firmly rejected. Left isolated from both sides of the Mediterranean, the mercenaries were expelled from the island by the native population. The Carthaginians were now preparing an expedition to retake the island, but when the Romans got wind of this, they protested and sided with the mercenaries who were now residing in Italy. The Carthaginians were accused of preparing an attack on Italy, and the Romans declared war. The Carthaginians barely survived the recent rebellion, and they were in no position to fight another war with Rome. A delegation was sent to Italy to beg the Romans to reconsider. After some back and forth, the Carthaginians agreed to abandon Sardinia and pay the Romans 1,200 talents. For reference, at the end of the First Punic War, the Carthaginians paid 1,000 talents with a further 2,200 over 10 years. It's unclear why this sudden change of heart from the Romans, but some answers are hidden in the agreed settlement. The loss of Sardinia was a major blow to the Punic naval ambitions. They were now left with only their African ports and a few small islands dotted across the Mediterranean. It's also possible that the Romans feared renewed hostilities in Sicily. If the Carthaginians sent a successful expedition to Sardinia, what was then stopping them from organizing a two-pronged assault on Sicily? The requested indemnity plays into this explanation nicely. The Carthaginians fought wars using mercenaries, meaning they required a lot of money for any prolonged conflicts. Handing over such a large sum would cripple the already weakened Punic economy, and they would be unable to field any large armies for some time. The crisis now averted, Hamilcar was ready for his expedition into Spain. During a ritual ceremony before departure, Hamilcar made his 9-year-old son Hannibal swear an oath to never be a friend to the Romans. Young Hannibal would take this oath to heart, never forgetting the promise made on that fateful day. Hamilcar Barca, accompanied by his son Hannibal and his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair, crossed into Iberia in 237 BC. Hamilcar used all Phoenician colonies as a base of operations. He set off from Gades, marching up the Baetis Valley. He crushed all resistance along the way, expanding Carthaginian influence inland for the first time. The defeated troops were offered mercy, and a large part of them joined the Punic army. Crucial silver mines in the west were captured, and newly minted coins started flowing from Gades. The upper Baetis Valley is surrounded by the Sierra Morena mountain range. The Oretani inhabiting these mountains would prove difficult to subdue. For years, Hamilcar campaigned in the area, and eventually, he decided to move his base to a closer location. He expanded his territory along the coast to the east and founded a new city, Acraleuce. From here, he could more easily push inland. During one of his campaigns in the Sierra Morena, Hamilcar was caught in an ambush. At the time, his son Hannibal was with him, and Hamilcar sacrificed his life in order to give his son a chance to escape. Hamilcar saved Carthage from the brink of collapse during the mercenary war. After that, he campaigned in Spain for 8 long years, greatly increasing Punic territory and wealth. Riches coming in from these new holdings enriched Carthage and brought it back to the international stage. Following the death of Hamilcar in 228 BC, his son-in-law Hasdrubal took over command in Iberia. His first order of business was crushing the Oretani, revenging Hamilcar, and finally capturing the rich Sierra Morena mountains. New silver mines were opened, and even more funds started flowing towards Carthage. Hasdrubal was more of a statesman than his predecessor. He used a combination of diplomacy and conquest to expand his territory all the way to the Tagus River. Hasdrubal built a new regional capital in Iberia, Carthago Nova. The splendor of this new city finally attracted Roman attention. Roman envoys were sent in 225 BC to negotiate with Hasdrubal. Neither side wanted another war, and they easily agreed on the new terms. The river Ebro was chosen as a boundary between the Roman and the Carthaginian spheres of influence. Hasdrubal was now free to focus on consolidating power in Iberia. But this wouldn't last long, as Hasdrubal met his end as abruptly as his predecessor. In 221 BCE, he put to death one of the Spanish chieftains, only for his loyal followers to break into Hasdrubal's quarters and murder him in his sleep. During his short reign, Hasdrubal proved a capable leader. He consolidated the power Hamilcar acquired in Spain and further expanded Carthaginian influence. During this time, he promoted Hannibal to a cavalry commander, providing him with valuable leadership experience. It was now finally time for the 25-year-old Hannibal to take up the command of the Punic forces. He immediately led a successful campaign in the north. Following this campaign, the tribes south of the river Ebro submitted to the Carthaginians. This left Saguntum, a small town friendly with Rome, isolated south of the river. In 219 BC, a delegation was sent to Hannibal to request that he abstain from interfering with their affairs. Although he had no prior plans to attack Saguntum, he turned his armies around and set siege to the city. We should now look to the Romans and their activities during the Interbellum. After bullying Carthage into backing down, the Romans sent an expedition to Sardinia in 237 BC. At the same time, they also conquered Corsica, further securing their foothold in the western Mediterranean. The two islands would be incorporated into a province in 227 BC. While the Romans were expanding their influence in the west, trouble was brewing in the east. Across from Rome, on the eastern shore of the Adriatic Sea, stood Illyria. The Illyrians weren't a single people, but rather a group of different tribes connected by a common language. Some of these tribes even crossed the Adriatic and settled in Apulia, long before the Roman conquest. The Illyrian tribes often fought among themselves for supremacy over the region. At times, one tribe or another would rise to dominate others in the region, but they would fall eventually, making way for others to take their place. The Illyrians were a warlike people, and they came in frequent contact with their neighbors, most notably the Macedonians. Around 250 BC, several Illyrian tribes united, forming the Ardean kingdom under the leadership of King Agron. This kingdom was financed mostly by piracy and raids. The Romans set up a colony in Brundisium to watch over the Adriatic, but they couldn't do much more as they were fighting a war in Sicily. When King Agron died in 231 BC, his son was too young to rule, so his wife Teuta took control as queen regent. Her first order of business was granting all Illyrian ships a license to plunder indiscriminately. She then gathered a large force and performed a series of raids on the coastline of the Peloponnese. On the return journey, she ordered a part of the army to take the city of Phoenice. The Epirotes were easily defeated and their city was taken. They would eventually ransom it back, joining in an alliance with Teuta. But while still in Phoenice, the Illyrians busied themselves with fervent piracy, robbing and capturing Italian merchants. The Romans, no longer embroiled in a war with Carthage, sent a delegation to Queen Teuta. In 230 BC, the two brothers presented Roman grievances to the queen. When they finished, Teuta assured the envoys that she avoided all official Illyrian aggression towards the Romans, but she couldn't prevent her people from acting on their own accord. The younger of the two brothers explained to the queen that Roman justice was swift to punish both the private citizens and those official channels that aid in their crimes. Angered by this rude reply, Teuta ordered her men to kill the young envoy. When the news of this murder came to Rome, an army was raised and a fleet gathered immediately. In 229, Teuta, not expecting Roman reprisal, sent an army to the Greek island Corcyra. Corcyra couldn't hold out on its own against the Illyrians, so they requested help from the nearby Aetolian League. The Greeks sent a small flotilla to aid their countrymen, but they were defeated in the Battle of Paxos. Seeing their only hope of rescue defeated, Corcyra surrendered to the Illyrians. A garrison was placed in the city under the command of Demetrius of Pharos. After this victory, the Illyrians turned their attention to the siege of Epidamnos, a Greek city on the Adriatic coast. In the meantime, Consul Gnaeus Fulvius Centumalus gathered 200 ships and sailed to Corcyra, marking the start of the First Illyrian War. Demetrius had a falling out with Queen Teuta, and he surrendered the city to the Romans. Corcyra became a Roman protectorate, believing that was the only way to protect themselves from further Illyrian aggression. and Demetrius joined Roman service. The fleet then continued to Apollonia, where they met up with the second consul, Aulus Postumius Albinus, who crossed from Italy with the 20,000-strong Roman army. Apollonia was as keen as Corcyra to come under Roman protection, and they too entered the Roman sphere of influence. Next up was Epidamnos. The Illyrian besiegers fled before the Roman army, and the city joined the protectorate. The Romans now pushed into the interior, crushing an Illyrian army that stood in their way. News of a Roman army started spreading throughout Illyria, and many Greek colonies, and even some smaller Illyrian tribes, sent envoys asking to join the Roman protectorate. Among these was the island of Issa, which was currently under siege by the Illyrians. The Romans sailed to Issa, lifted the siege, and then proceeded to capture a number of Illyrian settlements along the coast. Seeing there was no way of defeating the Roman army, Queen Teuta retired to Rhizon, an impregnable Illyrian town. Her rule over the Illyrians was shattered, and the Romans installed Demetrius as the new king of the Ardean kingdom. Postumius wintered in Epidamnos with his legion in case any of the new Roman allies required assistance, but early next year Teuta surrendered to Rome. According to an agreed treaty, Teuta kept hold of only a small number of towns in Illyria, but more importantly, Illyrians were forbidden to sail down the Greek coast. With this, the First Illyrian War was brought to a close. For generations, the Romans had to deal with frequent Gallic raids from the north. Ever since they first sacked Rome in 386 BCE, they presented a looming threat. Large Gallic armies would often venture south, allying with the Etruscans or the Samnites, and attacking the Roman northern borders. But after several heavy defeats during the Samnite Wars, the Gauls abandoned these dangerous expeditions, allowing the Romans to focus on southern Italy and Sicily. Now again, after the memory of those defeats had faded, a new army was rising up in Cisalpine Gaul. A large number of Gallic warriors from southern France came into Italy. This was enough to scare the Romans into signing a treaty with Hasdrubal, allowing him to focus on Iberia. In the meantime, Romans sent envoys to Veneti and Cenomani, and they entered into an alliance. These tribes would prove valuable allies to Rome, staying loyal even during Hannibal's invasion of Italy. In 225 BC, a large combined Gallic army numbering 50,000 foot and 20,000 horse marched south into Etruria. New Roman allies in Cisalpine Gaul meant that the Gauls had to leave a large garrison to defend their homeland from this new threat. News of this Gallic army caused great panic in Rome, and several legions were mustered with utmost haste. Roman allies were eager to send their own troops in support of Rome, seeing this invasion not as a threat to Rome, but a threat to them all. Polybius informs us that the Romans gathered the lists of all fighting-age men from their allies during this crisis. According to these lists, Romans had access to 700,000 infantry and 70,000 cavalry in total. In contrast, Hannibal invaded Italy with fewer than 20,000 troops, making his achievements all the more impressive. But we should return to the Gauls now. They marched through Etruria, plundering the countryside. Meeting no opposition on their way, they decided to head straight for Rome. When they reached Clusium, a Roman army stationed in Etruria tried to stop them, but they were ambushed and a good number of men were killed, while the others retreated to a defensible position on a nearby hill. The Gauls prepared to attack the survivors on the next day, but during the night, a Roman consul, Lucius Aemilius Papus, approached with his army. The Gauls, laden with plunder, decided to retreat to Cisalpine Gaul and distribute all the spoils, rather than risk an open battle with the Romans. On their way back, the Gauls were shadowed by Aemilius and his men. The other consul, Gaius Atilius Regulus, who was in Sardinia with his army, sailed to Pisa and started marching south. Atilius intercepted the Gauls near the Etruscan town Telamon. Seeing no way out, the Gauls formed up facing both directions and prepared for the battle. The two Roman armies then descended onto the Gauls, who held on for some time. Atilius rushed in with complete disregard for his own safety, hoping to win the lion's share of the credit for this victory, but he was killed by the Gallic king. The fighting was fierce on both sides, but eventually the Romans, with their better equipment, prevailed, and the Gallic army was destroyed. 40,000 Gauls died and 10,000 were captured. The next year, the Romans invaded Cisalpine Gaul, conquering the Boii, but an outbreak of the plague stopped their advance. In 223, the Romans once again marched north, but this time nothing could stop them. They defeated another large Gallic army near the Po River. The following year, the Gauls tried to surrender, but the Romans rejected their advance. Another member of the Scipio family, Scipio Calvus, marched into Cisalpine Gaul. After several victories on the field, he captured Mediolanum, the capital of Insubris. Unable to resist any longer, they submitted to the Romans, and the war against the Gauls was over. It was now clear for everyone to see that another conflict between Rome and Carthage was brewing. The Romans realized that control of the Adriatic would prove crucial in the upcoming clash. This meant that when Demetrius, their former ally, started acting against them, they had to move quickly. In 222, Demetrius renewed all ties with the Macedonian kingdom, helping them in a war against the Spartans. Illyrians, emboldened by this victory and in a firm alliance with the Macedonians, broke the treaty signed with Rome years prior. Demetrius sent attacks on some of the coastal cities that sided with Rome, and the Illyrian pirates took to the seas once more, sailing down the Greek coast. They also entered into an alliance with the Histri, who were already disrupting Roman shipping in the north of the Adriatic. Demetrius expected a Roman response, so he organized defenses across Illyria. The city of Demalum was heavily fortified, and a sizable garrison was placed there. Demetrius himself went to Pharos with 6,000 of his best men. While Demetrius was making these preparations, Hannibal started the siege of Saguntum in Iberia, and the Romans had to act. They set off for Illyria under the command of consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who would die only a few short years later, leading the Roman army at the Battle of Cannae. When the Romans arrived in Illyria, they could see that the Illyrians believed Demalum to be an unbreakable fortress. The Romans decided to take the city in order to break their morale. Demalum fell only a couple of days later, and as expected, many Illyrians lost heart and surrendered to the Romans. Paulus now brought his army to Pharos. The city of Pharos was well fortified, owing to the good natural defenses and a strong fortress. Paulus managed to trick the Illyrians into leaving the protection of the walls, and they were defeated in the open countryside. Demetrius, along with a small retinue of men, managed to escape Pharos on some ships that were hidden in a cave. He reached the court of the Macedonian king Philip V, where he stayed for the rest of his life. Paulus razed Pharos to the ground and subdued the rest of the Illyrians. In the late summer, the Second Illyrian War was over, and Paulus returned to Rome. By this time, Saguntum had already fallen to Hannibal, and the start of the next conflict with Carthage was at hand. Join us next time as we discuss the siege of Saguntum and the outbreak of the Second Punic War. Roman? No, Roman.